along with Priyanka, my group product manager. So we are from Harmonica Acumentis. In collaboration with ANT RCOG Group, we are here to talk on the high-risk pregnancy in this critical COVID times. So just a small introduction from our side regarding bad obstetric history. As it is a part of high-risk pregnancy, it is becoming more and more prevalent nowadays. And considering the situations around on the COVID times, pregnant women, because of their certain immunological and the hormonal changes, they are being need to be taken care of, and they need a special management here. So this is a small introduction of our brand that we have, which is Online Rewards, which ensures healthy pregnancy outcomes. It has N-methylfolate, methylcobalamin, pyridoxine 5-phosphate with multivitamin, multiminerals, and micronutrients like zinc, iodine, selenium, and copper. So this has Cochrane Library, Lancet, and everyone says that MMN and folate helps in better pregnancy outcomes. So we'll start with our just a small introduction of our coordinator, Dr. Jayashree Gajraj. She is a senior consultant obstetric gynae from Chennai, Apollo Specialist Hospital, MANGI Women's Health Exclusive. She was a past president of OGSSI, past chair of AICC RCOG SZ, founder, secretary, and president Chennai Menopause Society. Right now, current president ATN RCOG. Best Doctor Award for Dr. NGR Medical University. Okay, so that's all from my side. I'll hand over to Dr. Jayashree Gajraj, the coordinator of today's session. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. All of us are, as we repeatedly seem to be telling ourselves, in the midst of a major, we could call it a crisis situation. We have been thrown into this all of a sudden, and we're still trying to find the ropes on how to manage the situation properly. Obstetrics, even in the best of times, we all know, is a high-risk situation. And especially intrapartum, we know the sudden turn of events that can take place. Now, we hopefully over the years have to some extent learned how to manage these situations. But given the COVID times, is the management going to differ? Are we in any way going to manage these women differently? Are decisions going to be made with different guidelines in mind? How to manage these? We have with us lovely faculty, Dr. Radhika, who has first-hand experience with managing COVID patients, and somebody who has literally, I would say, has first-hand experience of COVID infection itself. Thank you, Radhika. I think we are very happy to have you with us. Dr. Sangeeta, who has extensively worked in the Kerala confidential inquiries with a lot of experience with the near-miss situations. She will be talking to us on the near-miss situations in intrapartum. Number of questions on how to test, how many times to test the patient, when do we test, how long is the test valid. I think there seems to be not much of a clarity on COVID testing. To tell us about this, we have Dr. Sivashankari with us, and then we have Dr. Umaram and Dr. Lakshmi, who will take us through the scenario of the questions that can be handled. So actually, we will be starting off with Dr. Sangeeta Menon, followed by Dr. Radhika Gosakan, and then by Dr. Sivashankari. Over to you, Radhika.
I think I get to come on now. Is it me first?
Yes, ma'am.
It's fine, ma. Don't worry. If you're, I had put down Sangeeta, but if Radhika's loaded the presentation, is that okay between the two of you?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, fine. So I think Radhika, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Good morning. This is morning in UK. For the panel and delegates, Vanakkam, Namaskaram, and good morning. Special thanks to Dr. Gajraj and Lakshmi for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Over the next 15 minutes, I hope to share with you our experiences in managing pregnancy and women with COVID-19. we all are aware that pregnant women are not more susceptible to viral infections, but if they do get infection, it might be far more severe. And we know that from the previous influenza H1N1 pandemic,
We've lost Radhika's audio.
Volume,
can you hear me now?
Yeah, but it's breaking up in between. Am I the only one hearing it that way?
There's a lot of
It is breaking up, and we lost for about the thing for one slide completely. We lost your voice.
I can. Can you hear me now?
Still echoing?
Not loud enough, Radhika.
Yes, let me.
Could you go back to slide 2 and
The background noise has come back again.
I'm John. Are everybody muted? Shall I carry on?
yeah, we can hear you now.
So I was just saying that with the
Can't hear.
can't hear.
Dr. Radhika, actually, we can hear, but your voice is breaking in between, so the words are not clear.
I wonder what it's to do with the signal, Wi-Fi signal. It's slightly better now.
It's still breaking, Radhika. It's not coming flow.
Ma'am, do you have headphones?
Refresh your
Dr.
screen, ma'am.
Radhika?
No, I don't.
Yes, ma'am, I guess it is okay. At least we can start. I guess it is.
Shall I continue now?
Yeah, I think keep talking. We'll see as it goes.
Okay. Let me just turn this. So I was talking about the influence of H1N1 pandemic, and we know that age match controls when women were having the H1N1 infection, they had more severe symptoms. Is that okay? Do you want to carry on? Shall I stop and see what's present and we will come back? May I suggest if you stop me, if Sangeeta goes first, I will get some headphones.
Dr. Jayashree, can we have some other presentation and then Dr. Radhika can present? Is it fine?
Yeah, that's what. If it's okay with you, Radhika, can I ask Sangeeta to proceed?
Yes, please.
Yeah, can we?
So,
Sangeeta?
Siddhant, can you upload Dr. Sangeeta's presentation? That's fine.
It's there. We can see
Yes.
it now. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Radhika. Sangeeta, we're ready to go. I'm just calling Sangeeta also.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay, okay, right. Okay, fine. Yeah. No, I think her voice was chopping. So I'll do one thing. If Sivasundari is ready, I'll ask her to start. Yeah, okay. Can we load Sivasundari's? Radhika's, Sangeeta's had a power cut. So, Shiva, are you okay to go? To start? Shiva?
Ma'am, Dr. Siva Sundari, I cannot see her in the list.
Green. Yeah, she's not there.
Jeshri,
Yeah?
can you hear me better now?
Sorry?
Yes,
Radhika,
Dr. Radhika. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
is it better now?
It is
Yeah,
better.
it's much
Ma'am,
better.
I guess we should go with Dr. Radhika only and let other doctors join, right?
Yeah, go ahead. No problem.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I am going to take another try. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, ma'am. We can.
It's much better, yeah.
So I was hoping to talk about pregnancy and labor management in COVID patients. We are aware that pregnant women are not more susceptible to viral infections. But when they do get viral infections, it might be far more severe. We know this from the previous H1N1 epidemic. And when they have varicella infection, they can get varicella pneumonia. So we are today going to talk about COVID-19. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but we all know that the disease is COVID-19. And the virus belongs to the coronavirus family.
Hello, John. Hello. Please, can you tell Dr. Siva Sundari and Dr. Sangeeta to join, please? They went off.
No, Dr. Sangeeta has had a power cut there. She's asked for 5 minutes. And Siva, I'm trying to contact her. Dr. Sangeeta needs 5 minutes. They've got a power cut there.
Shall I wait for a few minutes before
Yeah,
we
can
can
you hear me now?
They all are available, ma'am. Hello. They all
Hello?
are online, ma'am.
Hello?
I think all of us, including the organizers, have to mute our mics. Only then we'll be able to hear Radhika.
Yeah. Hello?
Ingama, suddenly you've gone off.
Hello?
Chal. Okay. Right.
Hello?
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, who is this?
Sangeeta?
Sangeeta, we're trying to go ahead with Radhika's.
Okay, fine.
Okay, just keep yours ready and then Radhika, are you okay? Yeah, go ahead.
Can I request everybody mutes themselves, please? So I was hoping that the objective of the session today, I would speak about the reduction of transmission of COVID-19 to pregnant, the provision of safe antenatal, postpartum, and postnatal services, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and more importantly, look at the care that we provide to women with suspected or confirmed COVID-19. So, objective one, I am tempted to quote William Orton, who is a great physician from Canada, who said, soap and water and common sense are the most important disinfectants which stop women from getting COVID in the first place. So it's really important that we educate our pregnant moms to stay at home, use masks, practice distance, and avoid unnecessary contact in the first place. The second objective is how we provide antenatal, postpartum, and postpartum services to our women who are pregnant. The key is the preparedness of the hospital and the team. There is a scope of virtual or telephone clinics with a view to reducing the face-to-face contact, and when people come, maximize the value of the visit. One could consider a COVID helpline, a Facebook page, or a WhatsApp advice group to these women. The most important objective we are going to discuss today is the labor management. We are all the clinical features of COVID-19. The most common of them being fever, fatigue, cough, and sense of breathlessness. I have acknowledged some of these symptoms, and these are symptoms that I personally experienced when I went through the COVID myself. Lots of things exist even to this day, personally. So when we look at the available literature today, in the non-pregnant cohort, 80% of women, 80% of people have mild. Only 50% of severe disease requiring oxygen. Is that better now? Is there still echo? Can you hear me better now? I think the echo is gone.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. It's better, I guess. Hello.
I have my cursor though to move to the next slide. Can you hear me? I lost my next button to proceed with the slides. Thank you. So we were talking about the literature review, and in the non-pregnant cohort, in the general population, 80% have mild disease, 15% severe disease requiring oxygen, 5% requiring ICU with a mortality of less than 1%. And if we look at a study published by Breslin wrote in the National Journal, it was almost similar to the non-pregnant population. Kushbu, can you give me the next slide, please? A publication by Dr. Nicole in the New England Journal of Medicine in two New York hospitals looked at 215 pregnant women screened while waiting for delivery, and 85% of the women were negative. Only 13.5% were asymptomatic and positive, and about 2% were positive and symptomatic. Next slide. So, looking further, let me review. There are lots of case series of reports which show that
Hello.
Prashant was about to review.
Siddharth, why is this voice coming? Hello, Siddharth?
Can the technical support team please do something? I think this is precious time we are losing.
Siddharth, are you there?
It's such a wonderful presentation and we are losing out on it.
Siddharth, can you hear me?
Why don't you call him on his line separately, Ma?
Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Siddharth, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello.
Siddharth, can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Ma.
No,
Hello?
maybe we should just go with Sangeeta in the meanwhile.
Hello?
I'm on.
Hello?
I just it's taking time to mute and unmute. So I'm just keeping it on. Ila, you want me to talk to Kushbu? Huh? Get Sangeeta back on. Sure.
Okay. Hello. Wait, ma'am.
Siddharth, is it okay? Can we start now? What is happening? Siddharth, can you hear me? Siddharth, can you hear me? Hello. Dr. Radhika?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, you can start. Please start it, ma'am. I guess it is okay.
Okay. Jayashree, Lakshmi, are you happy for me to carry on? Okay. Can we go to the previous slide, please, Khushbu?
Previous slide?
Yeah, thank you. Fine. Fine, thank you. The next one. Thank you. So, when you look at literature review, to date, there are loads of case series and reports presented with a preterm development of 47% and cesarean section of 84%, and majority of the data comes from China, where they have chosen cesarean sections with no evidence of any vertical transmission. Over the next few slides, technology asking us to do so. Can I have the next slide, please? We would like to share the data of something called as the United Kingdom Obstetric Surveillance System, which was carried out for 6 weeks as soon as the pandemic hit UK. Next slide, please. Kushbu, can I have the next slide? Thank you. It is the largest prospective national population-based cohort study, which looked at all the 194 obstetric units in the state. The return of data was 92%, and I'm pleased to share data of 227 pregnant women admitted to hospital with COVID-19 infection. All these women have PCR tested positive nasopharyngeal swabs in the blood or CT scan findings of COVID-19 in the lung. Looking at the 90 scientific reports, this is the largest population-based study today. Next slide. Looking at the results of the study, the hospital admission to COVID-19 roughly in UK was running at about 4.9 thousand a day. 56% of them were Black Asian minority. This is not valid in India because we are all Asian. 69% of these women were in the overweight or obese category. 41% of them were over the age of 35. And 1/3 of them had pre-existing comorbidities like gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, type 1 diabetes. Next slide. I don't think this is going to come through very well across to you because it's a very complicated slide. But I just wanted to point out. Let me use my laser pointer. That the cesarean section rate of COVID was running at about 14%, purely for COVID reasons. If we look at the maternal outcomes, roughly 10% of the women need critical care, 1% needed ECMO. As I mentioned earlier, almost a quarter of these women had COVID-19 pneumonia or infection. 5 women died, and majority of them were discharged well. Next slide. Of the women treated, 9 women were treated with antivirals, 8 with oseltamivir or lotimivir, and 1 with remdesivir. 15% of these women were given steroids for fetal lung maturation. Next slide. So, what I want to share with you about the preparation for labor, and again, I wanted to quote William Alder, the best preparation for tomorrow is to do today's work superbly. Next slide. So, one of the key things that most units did when the pandemic hit us was preparation, preparation, and preparation. When the women phoned the hospital, they had a high telephone number, and the staff who pick up the telephone, it's like a hotline. Ask the women for symptoms of COVID. If they do have symptoms of COVID, then the staff go and receive them, wearing the PPE, and also giving the woman a mask to wear. They are then taken through a dirty corridor, or a dirty pathway, or the red pathway it's called, directly to the labor. All this was done through simulation and staff training prior to the women coming in. The rooms were adequately prepared with all the obstetric equipment needed. There was an entire set of equipment in these rooms, and there were special iPads given to the carer when they were with a hotline again to phone out, so that when they wanted extra equipment, it could be brought into the room. Staff of taking care of women with COVID-19 or suspected COVID-19 stared in those rooms with the PPE. Clear-cut, dirty, and doffing areas were created. Once within the room, they assessed COVID symptoms, maternal operations including temperature, respiratory rate, and oxygen saturation were done at an early rate so as to assess the deteriorating women, and they were clear and to maintain the oxygen saturation to more than 94%. Next slide. The staff was chosen, and if you had to come out, it was roughly between 4 to 6 hours. If the partner wants to attend with the woman, again they had the questioning about the COVID symptoms. They had a to check, and then they entered the room and stayed in. The labor was exactly as before. I alluded to the substitutions already. Enteronol is a love used with patient microbiology filter, and it really explains to the woman the dawning of PE takes time, especially when the decision needs to be made for cesarean section. And in emergency situations, women were taken directly to the theater. Those in the theater stayed within the theater. They were designated runners outside, and all within the theater stayed in the full F3 mask. Mask stations, mask departments, and there was one person dedicated to communicate with the runner with the stuff. Recovery happened within the theater, and there was almost like a PP police who would control the staff from moving out and in with these areas, and a proper disposal of all this equipment. Next slide. This is a personal tip that I would like to share, because it's very important for women to understand if they have COVID or if the staff gets COVID, what to do. It's really important that they continue to eat healthy food, and when we are unwell, we remain isolated. So all the food and the foods are given at your room bedroom doorstep. It's really important people affected by COVID in hygiene. All the clothes should be washed separately. All the medication should be left within the room. I individually had a probe to monitor my pulse saturation every 6 hours or at least minimum of twice a day when I was feeling unwell. It was encouraged sleep alone, though sometimes it becomes very difficult, so as to increase the air into the lung bases. Practices like home chanting increases the air entry into the lungs. Psychological boosting is really important. When you're isolated in the room, you feel really down, and protection and prevention to the rest of the family members is really important as well. And that's my presentation done. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. Apologize for the disturbances that were happening, but that was a very crisp and effective presentation. We'll take questions in the end. While we wait for Jayashree, she's come back.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just thanked Radhika, Jayashree,
Yeah,
and
I
to
heard
you,
you.
Sangeeta. Yeah,
You
okay.
were saying almost the same words, I think. So I'm extremely sorry, Radhika. Wonderful slides, and it's, we did hear you, but then a little bit we were missing out here and there. But thank you very much. Very, very practical tips from what I can see from the slides. We'll move on now to Dr. Sangeeta Menon's talk, review of obstetric near miss. Sangeeta?
Yeah. I'm here to talk about. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. I'm here to talk about the near miss and what we have done, and a few cases as well. I think the reason why I'm happy to be here is, one, because of course Chennai has called me, and two is because I have a very personal interest in maternal mortality and more so near miss. Because we do a confidential inquiry starting from 2004. We've been doing this, the confidential review of maternal deaths. It's really given us a lot of valuable inputs into maternal deaths and a lot of corrective measures that we have done as well. In the course of what we have done, I just like to share some slides on our percentages as well. When we started off, it was hemorrhage and hypertension as the number one causes of maternal death. But as you go along, we don't have the 1920 data because we haven't compiled it thanks to COVID. But if you look at the 18-19 data, hemorrhage still ranks number one. Hypertension is no longer number two. You'll see sepsis, heart disease, pulmonary embolism is creeping up. Sorry. As well as the liver disease, neurological disease, all these are almost at 7 to 8%. And what we are worried about in a big way is suicide. It's a really sad thing for maternal deaths to be caused due to suicide. And as opposed to the West, we don't have postpartum suicides or postpartum depression causing deaths, but it's more of antenatal events like burns and things like that. So we have a special protocol. I'm not going into it. We also have anesthesia deaths. The number of deaths was 163, but we've been able to analyze, which came to us only 97 of them. Why is this jumping? Okay, we have a Kerala Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and it has a large role in reducing maternal mortality. We started off the maternal inquiry into deaths in 2004. In between, for the past 4 or 5 years, we've been doing something called the MD-NMSR. We've combined this into a maternal death and a near miss surveillance and response. And we've also started having what is called an ORRT team for each hospital, which is an obstetric rapid response team. It's really brought about a lot of change in the way our really sick mothers are tackled. this kind of information is disseminated to all our colleagues. There is a large role by the government. The government takes a lot of stake in this. And we started off actually by establishing certain quality standards in obstetric care. You'd ask me why we want to look at, why we want to evaluate these cases. The simple reason being the pathological, the circumstantial factors that surround most acute events in pregnancy are similar. Some of them die, which is very sad, and a large proportion narrowly they escape this death, and they are the near misses. And what we have found is all these experiences should not be a fault-finding exercise, but rather these experiences should be interpreted as free lessons and opportunities to improve. When we started as well, there was a lot of apprehension, but that has really changed. And we must also understand that these near misses, so-called near misses, are much more commoner than the maternal death. The reasons and the causes are largely the same. And in fact, it's much less threatening to providers to discuss a near miss rather than a death, and the women themselves can be interviewed. This is just for you to understand that there is this kind of a document. I'm not going into the details because I don't have the time. But just for you to understand that this maternal near miss review will tell you what are the cases really documented. I'll tell you the process that we do in Kerala. That is, suppose I have a near miss in my hospital. I work for a medical college, a very large teaching institution. It is discussed within the first 10 days of the month in our monthly meeting or our monthly audit. From there, on the third Thursday of the month, it goes to the district. We go and the whole district comes together with their cases. It need not be a large teaching hospital. Even single women or men-led obstetric units bring up their cases. They just send it to us earlier. It's a totally anonymized case sheet. We have no idea of where it's coming from. It is discussed, and the data then is transmitted to the center, which sits at Thrissur. And every 3 months, there is a state-level meeting. We discuss it, and then it is compiled every 3 years into a book. So it really goes through 3 filters, one at the institute, one at the district, and one at the center, and the center for the whole state as well. I'm just going to run you through 3 or 4 cases. I know that I'm short of time, and I will be as precise as I can. The first case, these are near miss cases. So and I'll kind of tell you what are the things that we have done. They may be very small things, and what I'm going to say is not rocket science, but it's just for you to understand that putting them all together and putting them in a very systematic format really helps. That's what has been our understanding of this. A 29-year-old third gravida, previous for both normal deliveries, she underwent an elective cesarean at 38 plus weeks for a breech. She developed PPH and underwent a relaparotomy 5 hours later. And when we opened her up, there was 1.5 liters of blood in the peritoneal cavity. There was oozing from the uterine incision, and obstetric hysterectomy was done. She was in DIC by then, so we really don't know whether the oozing was because of the DIC or whether there was an angle bleeder. But the fact remains that the PPH was because she had vaginal bleeding. She was given 5 packed cells, 5 platelet concentrates, and 5 FFPs. And she developed pulmonary edema. She was treated in a multidisciplinary ICU. She recovered and she was discharged by day 17. So what were the learning points? It was a PPH. We should have had a much more careful post-op monitoring. Today we use the maternal early obstetric warning chart. And the sisters know that if there has 1 red or 2 yellows, they call us immediately. And in the post-op monitoring, what we really stress on now is it's not just pulse and blood pressure. The uterus has to be below the umbilicus. It has to be central, and it should be hard and contracted. And if I were to gently push that uterus down, it should not expel any clots from the vagina. This, the residents in training, the nurses, and everyone else has to do this, and I'll show you the documentation. We use now as a routine separate angle sutures. That's the right angle. You always start suturing from the left. As you come, Sometimes the right angle is not tackled well enough. So we have a separate right angle suture and then we start from the left. Whenever you have a PPH, yes, push in fluid, but over-enthusiastic fluid before really you get the blood can result in pulmonary edema. But once you have DIC, you should aggressively manage it. And if you're referring a hypovolemic patient, the non-pneumatic anti-shock garment must be used. This is the chart. We all know we must use it. What was the Kerala Federation's role? We identified hemorrhage as the #1 cause of death, and we developed 5 quality standards to address PPH. So what were those 5 quality standards? We said every delivery, whether normal or vaginal or cesarean, must have the active management of third stage practice. Every woman must be observed for at least 2 hours after delivery. There must be a good blood transfusion facility available. If not, refer early. There must be a HD or ICU where you can observe such patients separately. And since we are so worried about accreta placentas, in a previous cesarean section, there must be a scan at 32 weeks with the intention of picking up that accreta. And our AMTSL policy is 5 units of oxytocin diluted to 5 ml given IV over a period of 5 seconds. So it's a 3 5s, 5, 5, 5. 10 units of oxytocin is given intramuscularly. And in those who have, let's say it was a big baby, it was a twin, she was in labor for a long time, anyone who has a predilection for PPH, you give the 20 units oxytocin, 500 ml of saline at about 60 drops a minute. This is the stamp that we have. Every woman who delivers will have the seal on her case sheet. And once there is a seal, I guess everybody just has to push it in. You have to look at the pulse, look at the blood pressure, look at that uterine fundus. Is it central? Is she expressing any clots? And insist, most importantly, on the uterine status and look for those expressed clots. This is how we do it in our hospital. This is a must. We have also included whether she has passed urine or not, because it is only after that. The reason being that it's not just for the sake of documentation, but it's also so that we realize that it's not just pulse and blood pressure. Sometimes pulse and blood pressure takes a long time to change an obstetric hemorrhage. So we also need to look at the amount of bleeding. If there is still bleeding after all the active management that you've done, we have the transvaginal uterine artery clamp. I will admit to you that at the beginning, I was also a little worried. Will it injure the ureter? Will I have problems? But I can tell you, once you put it in, the field is so dry, you're breathing much more easily. Or we use the suction cannula. I'll just tell you about it in a while. This is just a demo for you to understand that the anterior lip is caught, the posterior lip is caught with the sponge holder, and the uterine artery clamp is put on either side. I show you the uterine artery clamp. This is how it looks. Pilisa has been very generous in donating it to us. And it's a curved instrument. The curved end faces inside. One end of it is inside the cervix and one end is outside. And so you just push it up a bit and apply both sides. That's both the right and the left. And then you find that your field is dry. Then you have time. Do I need to put in a condom tamponade? Do I need to aggressively put in medical management of PPH? I have time. I have more time to get the blood instead of her pushing blood a lot through the vagina. This is how, again, the uterine artery clamp looks. It's really a lifesaver. If you don't have it, we also have the Panikars and the Samartharam cannulas. These are the cannulas. We don't use the big ones with the big nozzles at the end because they tend to catch decidua sometimes in between. This is what we use, and it is connected to a suction device. This suction device then fits into the uterus, and the uterus really, in an atonic PPH, it really will clamp down on that cannula, and you will have a much better contracted uterus with less bleeding at the end. If that doesn't work, any form of medical management, you can cocktail the oxytocin, the methergin, the PGF2 alpha, and the PG1. But just one change that we have made, which I've put in red, we never give the methergin IV, we give it only IM. Then the condom tamponade, and as anybody else would, before she goes into DIC, take her up to the theatre, either a devascularization, a brace, or rarely a hysterectomy. So that's the condom. I know that's just to show you the inflated condom, just for you to understand that once it's inside the uterus will clamp on it and the bleeding will be less. Vaginal lacerations, you just step on it with a little bit of pressure, but if you find that they're very extensive, these are the kind of situations that sometimes need a laparotomy, especially if it's a colporexis, or which may need an internal iliac ligation, not so much the atonic PPH, but rather the traumatic PPH. We've had some traumatic PPHs due to anterior abdominal wall bleeding, angle bleeding, sometimes an atonic collection within the uterus. Our policy is, before you close the abdomen, check under the rectus muscle. Is your inferior epigastric okay? Is it bleeding? Has it retracted? As I told you earlier, put a double tie on the angle on the right side. This is a change in the way we tackle our cesarean sections, and a mattress is used for the right side. The oxytocic, especially when you've had a mild degree of PPH, has to be continued at least for 2 hours. Make sure the uterus is contracted, and any clots within have to be sent out. So the cervix has to be opened after a cesarean. If it's not, put in a gentle dilator and then don't use it anymore. That's as far as the PPHs. I couldn't but put in hypertension as well. So this was a 27-weeker who came with no fetal movements with a very high blood pressure, 208, 134. She was given IV levetolol, oral nifedipine, and the loading dose of magnesium sulfate. The scan showed an IUD. It was not an abruption. The BP was not under control at a higher center. She needed nitroglycerin. She was referred to us, and the nitroglycerin was given. Coagulation studies were abnormal, but she wasn't bleeding. There's a gross derangement of RFT, LFT, and platelets, and she delivered quickly with the second dose of PG1. These were her labs. They were really a mess. Urea was high, creatinine was high, SGOT and SGPT was also high, INR was high, but she wasn't bleeding. Platelets were somewhere between 46,000 and 85,000. And she was seen by a nephrologist. He asked for a complement. The complement levels were low, so he thought it could be either a HUS or a TTP. A plasmapheresis was done. She was given Udiliv to support the liver, sucralfate, as well as N-acetylcysteine, and she kind of improved over 19 days. What were our take-home points? She looked like she was in HELP. We initially thought it was HELP, but why was she not improving? So you think of an alternative diagnosis other than HELP if the BP, the labs, and the patient worsens after delivery. After delivery, the HELP must improve. And such patients who have multi-organ dysfunction are best managed in a multidisciplinary ICU, and a medical board must be constituted for these kind of patients. The obstetrician should lead the team for a synchronized effort. Bringing down the blood pressure must be aggressive to prevent that IC bleed, and the loading dose of magnesium sulfate should be given early. Don't wait. Don't wait for the RFT, just give the loading dose fast. What were our quality statements for hypertension? Routine check. This was a simple thing, but very often missed. Routine check of blood pressure at every visit. Protein at least once every trimester, if not at every visit. We treat earlier than the recommended in the Western literature. We treat at 140/90. And once it crosses 100, 110 diastolic, we are with IV levetolol. If HELP, we deliver immediately, and magnesium sulfate is given early. Ouch, ouch, ouch. I think this is okay. So the third case, she had an emergency cesarean at full dilatation 9 hours after a rupture membrane. She was given injection taxim after the rupture membrane, and she was given the same injection taxim as well as Metrogyl after the cesarean. By post-op day 3, she started having a fever. There was abdominal distension. The total count was 17,000. She was put nilperoral. Her antibiotics were stepped up to piperacillin, tazobactam. We wondered why the distension was there. We asked for a surgery consult. He thought it was paralytic ileus. Her potassium was normal. When we did an ultrasound, which is a must in such kind of cases, we found a small 5-centimeter collection on the right side of the uterus. We didn't really feel like opening it up. Antibiotics were stepped up further, but her fever continued. Then we were wondering whether to open or not. The total count was rising. Her RFT and LFT started deranging. Again, INR was elevated, but there was no bleeding. She was treated in the MD ICU with infectious disease HELP, and it took 10 days, but she rallied around. We didn't open her. So sepsis is a problem. It's an increasing menace. Asepsis is the answer and not antibiotics. Judicious use of antibiotics has to be there. You have to pick up sepsis early, and then you aggressively manage. But cleanliness, you treat your theater in a very, you godlike fashion, your labor room is also your temple. So your clean environment in the theater and the labor room, proper cleaning of all instruments. Once the cervical mucus is gone or the membranes have ruptured, it's a time-sensitive situation. You try to deliver within 12 hours. If not delivered, at least within 12 hours. If you have not, then you start antibiotics rather aggressively. The surgical site infection should be picked up early. You must palpate the wound. You must explore early if you're in doubt. When you close the wound, don't leave the subcutaneous tissue exposed. That could be one of the factors. Invoke the principles of sepsis bundles. Make sure that there is an IV fluid challenge that you have given if she is in hypotension. Most importantly, and I'll harp on this again and again, is take a specimen for culture and say, whether it is from the wound, whether it's a high vaginal swab, please take that specimen so you can direct your antibiotic and either upgrade or downgrade appropriately. Monitor the urine output, check the lactate, drain pus, and if in labor, deliver early. We like to stick to first-generation cephalosporins, but it's not available. So sometimes we do give Taxim, but that's not the right thing. Cefazolin is the answer. One point at cesarean, now we've started cleansing the vagina. When we catheterize, we clean the vagina with either betadine or chlorhexidine. And we must factor in the weight of the patient and the duration of surgery when writing out our antibiotic. I don't think I have time for the case, but I will, last case, but what I will do, is that gone? Is it gone? I'm not able to move my slides. Prashant, can you help me out? Why are my slides not moving?
They are moving.
Yeah, they are. They're not moving on mine.
Which one do you want?
Okay, well, let me just go back to the, I just put in, because I think there is, do I have time for one more case? No. Okay, fine. I just go into the last slides where, at the end of when we discuss a near miss, we publish the snippet on WhatsApp groups. So some of the snippets over the last 4 months I'm going to put in here. Cesarean section is a big factor at most of the near misses, so we need to bring down our cesarean section rates. No cesarean sections for cord around the neck on ultrasound. All antenatal women must have their cardiovascular system auscultated, and you can pick up heart disease early. And remember, you must pick it up early, not at 28 weeks when she comes with hemoptysis. Pulmonary arterial hypertension sometimes goes missed, and then you terminate early. Don't let the pregnancy event tax the heart further. There is an entity of stress-induced cardiomyopathy, is a sequel to hypotension, and it mustn't be confused with postpartum cardiomyopathy. We have started using a pocket pulse oximeter in the kit of the ORRT team because that's so important, especially in the COVID days. Vaginal delivery is preferred in viral hepatitis, and induction of labor must be on obstetric grounds. Induce multi-paras carefully if you want to avoid a rupture. We are slow with prostaglandin for such women, but on a routine, even with an ARM and a prostaglandin, we wait for at least an hour before we start oxytocin. Unnecessary cerclages are a no-no because it creates an environment for sepsis. If you have to refer a ruptured ectopic, I think you must be really bold to do it because very many of them collapse on the way. So complete the laparotomy, or if you don't have the facility to do it, run with the patient, at least push in fluids so that she has a pulse and BP by the time she reaches the higher center. While you open the peritoneum at cesarean section, avoid sharp instruments. Many a time there is an inadvertent injury to the bowels, and especially when the cesarean is done late in labor. Adverse drug reactions, we must be comfortable with adrenaline. We must be able to give that 0.5 ml intramuscularly. And so SOPs must be in place for all this. And I think it's time we started creating ORRT teams everywhere. And remember, in blood pressure, you have to bring down the blood pressure because a fit is not going to kill the patient, but an intracranial bleed will. And in sepsis, hit hard and hit fast. I think that's it. I've missed out one case, but I guess that's fine. That was a pulmonary embolism. Is that okay? Hello?
Excellent, Sangeeta. That
Yes,
was
ma'am.
very good.
It was
And
very
I'm sure
nice. Thank
there
you.
are questions as well, which we can take in the question session. The next speaker is Shivasundari. Shivasundari is a professor of Obs and Gynae at Savita Medical College, and she's going to talk about timing of COVID testing, which is something that many queries and doubts keep coming up, especially in all the OB WhatsApp groups, the pros and cons of testing and when we should test, and if we test, should we induce, and if we induce, when do we induce? So over to you, Shivasundari.
Good evening. Thank you, ma'am. So when this particular topic of clarity in COVID testing in pregnancy was given to me, the following questions arose in my mind. What are the principles of doing COVID testing in pregnancy? When it has to be done, 37, 38, 39 or 40 weeks? For whom it has to be done? Only for the women or for the accompanying person who's going to stay with her in the postpartum period? And what are the tests which are available? And how are we going to interpret the results? So the cycle of locking and unlocking depends on various components. Similarly, guidelines and recommendations, they keep on changing every day and every minute. This is the first line which is given in the document regarding the principles of testing and triaging of women seeking maternity care during COVID-19 pandemic by RCOG. The statement goes like this. This is a dynamic document. It will be continually updated as national guidelines evolves, new research emerges, and experience matures. So what are the principles of COVID testing? Pathways should be implemented that aim to reduce the risk of SARS-CoV-2 infection in hospital for women, visitors, and for staff. What do we mean by that? If a woman does her test for COVID prior to admission, if it is negative, she enters into elective care pathway. What does it mean? She is unlikely to get SARS-CoV-2 infection during admission. But the testing process should not compromise the delivery of safe, quality, personalized, and equitable care for all women. All pathways must follow local and national infection and prevention control procedures to implement and continue to implement appropriate use of personal protective equipments. So, when we have to do? According to the recommendations by RCOG, for all pregnant women, COVID testing should be offered 72 hours pre-admission. Apart from that, she requires strict home isolation for 14 days prior to the admission, along with the accompanying person who is going to stay with her during the postpartum period. When these two criteria are met, she enters into true elective pathway. So two things are needed. One is negative test 72 hours prior to the admission and strict home isolation for 14 days. But what are the limitations of strict home isolation in our country and including the Western world? The socioeconomic status, they have to go for shopping, they have to go for working, and labor is highly unpredictable. So we are left with, if a woman comes with a negative test 72 hours prior to the admission without strict home isolation for 14 days due to practical difficulties, the care remains the same, but we can do slight practical adjustments like posting her at the end of the list during our elective section list, but the care remains the same with appropriate personal protective equipment. So what does FOXI GCPR guideline says? This is second issue, which was issued on 28th April 2020. The same guidelines which are applicable to general population will be applicable to all pregnant women. All symptomatic women who have undergone international travel within 14 days should be tested for COVID-19. All symptomatic contacts of confirmed cases, all symptomatic healthcare workers. What do we mean by symptomatic women? If their temperature is more than 38, cough, sore throat, congestion, then absence of taste and smell. We call it as ILA-like symptoms. And all symptomatic healthcare workers. And if they have symptoms, somebody is moving the slide. And if they have symptoms of SARI, again, they have to be tested. Then all asymptomatic women who are of direct and high risk contact, the test should be done on day 5 and day 14 of exposure. What do we mean by direct or high risk contact? If they live in the same family, they work in the same room, or if they travel together, then they become high risk. Somebody is changing my slide before I complete. Yeah. And direct contact is if they have contact for more than 15 minutes within 1 meter distance, they become direct contact, or any direct contact with the body fluids. The main important thing is the additional recommendation which is included for asymptomatic pregnant women, particularly in India, if they belong to a hotspot, or if they are coming from containment zones, or if they belong to large migration evacuees from the hotspot, they should be tested for COVID-19. When they have to be tested, when they get into labor or likely to deliver in 5 days, the testing should be done if the women fit into the above criteria. But at the same time, we should not delay or deny any obstetric management in order to test for COVID-19. All pregnant women should be tested according as per ICMR guidelines. If they are not coming into the criteria for ICMR guidelines, we can offer them COVID test 72 hours prior to admission along with home isolation for 14 days. It's our duty to explain to her the advantages of doing the COVID test, the advantages of putting her into elective care pathway, the advantages of additional care she requires if she turns positive, the advantages of doing COVID test if she turns positive for the baby also. In fact, the recent recommendation is to give postpartum thromboprophylaxis for 10 days if she turns COVID positive. If she denies, ultimately it is her choice. If she denies, the same care of a woman whose test result is pending should be offered to her. So do we need to repeat the test? So she has followed all the protocols, like 72 hours prior to the admission. She has done the test, it is negative, and she is into strict home isolation for 14 days along with the accompanying person. Do we need to repeat the test? How long it is valid? If the hospital stay exceeds on day 5, test is offered to her. Do we do COVID testing for the accompanying person? By ICMR, it is not mandatory, but if they fit into the criteria of doing the test, then test has to be done for them. But in Western world, they do offer for the partners who stay during labor and in the postpartum period. So what are the tests which are available? So we are left with real-time RT-PCR, the TrueNAT and the CBNAT test, the standard Q COVID-19 antigen detection assay. The first two, they work on the same principle of reverse transcriptase PCR, that is the polymerase chain reaction. Then the latest addition of test is standard Q COVID-19 antigen detection assay. The last one, the IgG ELISA CLA antibody test, it is used only for surveillance, not for diagnosis of COVID in pregnant women. So what are the principles? So I'm not going to detail, just the basic principles of reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction. Main thing, they detect only the presence of viral nucleic acid in the swabs we send. What do? They convert into DNA by reverse transcriptase, they amplify it, and they read for specific genes of COVID-19 with the help of fluorescence in a real-time computer mode. So, as obstetricians, we have to know which is the gold standard test for diagnosis of SARS-CoV-2 infection throughout the world, including India. So, real-time RT-PCR is the gold standard test for diagnosis of SARS-CoV-2 infection in pregnant women. As we all know, the swabs are taken from the nasopharynx and the oropharynx, and they are put into the viral transport medium. And how long will it take for us to get the reports? If you run a lab of doing RT-PCR in your own institution, it takes 4 to 6 hours. If we send for outside samples, it will take around 24 to 48 hours sometimes. So what is the real advantage of real-time RT-PCR? We can run 90 samples at one run But extra biosafety and biosecurity measures have to be there, because the virus is put into the virus transport medium. Unless we separate the nucleic acid, still it remains active. But the main disadvantage is, even if the patient is symptomatic, sometimes we have the report as negative. What is a false negative rate? It's nearly up to 10 to 30%. Various studies have quoted that the virus remains in the nasopharynx or in the oropharynx up to 3 weeks, whereas from the stool it can remain up to 4 weeks. But we take only the nasopharynx and the oropharynx. The TrueNAT and the CBNAT. Actually, we have all these missions in PHCs and in the district level hospitals in India for the diagnosis of tuberculosis. So the two things are used. What is the difference between TrueNAT and CBNAT? The TrueNAT is a two-step process. It might take a little bit of time than CBNAT. CBNAT, it is a one-step process. Okay, the main advantage of it is it takes only 30 to 60 minutes for us to get the reports, but only 1 to 4 samples can we get at a time. So per day, 24 to 48 samples can be done. So we are left with only the 3 tests right now. Okay. So we have nearly 1,000 ICMR approved labs. If you go to the ICMR site, you can see which labs are doing what test. Nearly 557 RT-PCR are available till date. So how are we going to interpret the report? What does it mean if the result is positive? That means she is presumptively infected and presumed to be contagious. What does it mean if the result is negative? What do I mean by presumed to be contagious? Because the test just detects the viral nucleic acid and doesn't tell us whether the viral particles are infectious or not. So they've given the statement like presumed to be contagious. What does it mean if the result is negative? If the result is negative, always we have to keep in our mind that there is a false negative report of 10 to 30%. If they are symptomatic, if they have ILI-like symptoms or SARI-like symptoms, then you have to treat them clinically rather than by going the false negative report. So the new test which is introduced in India is standard Q COVID-19 antigen detection assay, which is the point of care test. What are the advantages, and have we started using it now? It has got a very high specificity, that is nearly 99 to 100%, but the sensitivity is 50 to 84%. What does it mean? Suppose if the test is negative, you cannot rely on the test. We need to do RT-PCR technique. If it is positive, you can rely that the person is infected with SARS-CoV-2 infection. Right now, ICMR has recommended that in containment zones with ILI symptoms, asymptomatic individuals in containment zones with comorbidities, or in hospitals like immunocompromised patients, those who require chemotherapy, dialysis, bronchoscopy, endoscopy. But till date, till 5:20 p.m. right now, it has not been included as a test for detection of COVID-19 pregnancy in India, particularly in Tamil Nadu. But it will be a great boon for us because we get to have so many patients in emergencies. Probably in a couple of weeks, it might get included. So this is a very simple test where from only one sample is required from the nasopharynx. It is put inside the tube, spun over five times. Then you turn the tube and put 2 to 3 drops of it. And it's like a simple Precard test, and you get the report in 15 to 30 minutes time. But after collecting the report, after collecting the specimen, it cannot be kept for more than an hour. It has to be done within an hour. And the temperature maintenance should be 2 to 30 degrees. If you get 2 lines, that means it is positive. And 1 line in the control and negative line in the test, it becomes negative. When the 2 are negative, and you don't have any lines at all in the kit, it becomes invalid. Again, I'm repeating, if it is negative, you need to confirm by RT-PCR method. If it is positive, you can consider the women as having COVID positive. So what about the IgG ELISA CLA antibody test? It is used only for surveillance, not for diagnosis COVID-19 infection in pregnancy, because the IgG starts to increase only after 14 days of infection. So what does evidence say regarding the antibody surveillance? We have the recent publication in Cochrane database where they have reviewed 57 publications. The total number is 15,976 and 8,526 are positive. The sensitivity is too low in the first week, likely to be useful for detecting previous infection if done after 15 days of symptoms. So this test is not done for diagnosis, it is only for surveillance. So what about other investigations? The same rule, like lab investigations and storm markers, the criteria remains the same as for general population. What about CT and chest X-ray, which are very important as a complementary tools in patients with the SARS-CoV-2 infection? They are not contraindicated in pregnancy, but the two things we have to do is abdominal shielding and informed consent. So what is the evidence of these lab investigations? Only one review article is there regarding the laboratory findings of COVID-19 infection in pregnant women. More studies are needed for interpretation of laboratory results because of varied physiological changes in pregnancy. So what is the take-home message? So 100% the test should be done in all pregnant women from hotspots and containment zones, or they belong to the migrant evacuees from the hotspots areas. And when they get into labor or likely to deliver in 5 days. The COVID testing is for other women who don't fit into ICMR criteria. COVID testing is offered how many days prior to the admission? 72 hours prior to the admission. But we have to insist on strict home isolation for 14 days, including the accompanying person or the partner or husband. Accompanying person in India, it's not mandatory unless they fit into the criteria laid down by ICMR, but it is offered in the Western world, which is a gold standard diagnosis of RT, which for COVID-19, it is real-time RT-PCR. When do we repeat the test? How long it is valid? If the patient stays for more than 4 days, on day 5, it has to be offered. An antibody test only for surveillance. Antigen test, it is a welcome tool, but we have not yet started using it right now for the diagnosis of COVID in pregnancy. So always I like the statement from stalwart Shanta ma'am. Yesterday's research is today's treatment and today's research is tomorrow's treatment. We need to publish more Indian data. So with His grace, I think we will win over the coronavirus. Thank you ma'am once again for the wonderful opportunity. Ma'am? Hello? Ma'am? Hello?
Thank you, Dr. Sivasundari.
Thank you,
That
ma'am.
was a very good, crisp presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. I apologize if I have exceeded my allotted time of 10 minutes.
There were a lot of important take-home messages that you were able to deliver.
Thank you, ma'am.
We will start with the question and answer session.
Sure, ma'am.
And is Dr. Radhika available to take questions?
I think she is online.
Yes. Are we not able to hear her? Anybody able to hear Dr. Radhika? Then maybe we can ask Dr. Sangeeta. And Dr. Sangeeta, we just wanted to know, labor being a dynamic process, it's quite hard for us to predict and time the 72-hour swab as is being stated. Yes, Dr. Radhika is there. You can take this question, Dr. Radhika, if you're able to hear us.
What's the question, Lakshmi?
I'm just starting the question now.
Thank you.
Are you actually doing planned induction of labor to help the swab taking, and how are you then judging whom to induce? Are you keeping a gestation cutoff? What are you doing for special risk groups like diabetes?
So with regards to induction, it is primarily sticking to obstetric indication still. I saw on the chat, there was somebody who asked me about diabetic with insulin, what would we do about induction? So if she is close to 38 weeks, then she will continue to have, if you've made a decision about induction, she will continue to have the induction as planned, because COVID is far less within the pregnant population. If you can plan the induction, they still get a swab 3 days before, suggesting them to try and isolate if they can. However, isolation should not be an indication for them seeking advice. So, for example, in the 3 days of isolation, they have decreased fetal movements or bleeding, then that should not be a reason for them not to seek obstetric advice. So you proceed with induction as they would. And when they come into hospital, they will have another swab, and you will treat as if they are, like, it's called the amber pathway, because you don't know the results. So your PPE will be similar to what PPE you would use for suspected COVID patients. And if possible, we are trying to do mechanical induction like the balloon. So once they have the balloon, these women can go home and they're not within the hospital confined areas, to minimize their risk of picking up COVID while they're in the hospital as well. And once they come in, you ARM them and proceed with induction as planned. I hope I've answered that question.
No, the question is, Radhika, and maybe Sangeeta can take it from an Indian perspective also.
Yeah.
We don't tend to send our women home after initiating induction, even if it is mechanical. But my question was, we are swabbing our women pre-admission, whether it's 1 week or 72 hours before EDC. That's, I think practice dependent. But my question is, we swab and she turns out to be positive. So she's asymptomatic positive, which is what the majority of the women that we are seeing are, and she is slated for an induction or a repeat section in 3 days' time. Now, she's an asymptomatic positive. Should we go ahead with this induction as planned? Should we defer it so that a 10-day period is completed, at which point, if she continues to be asymptomatic, she can be treated as negative? Or because she's COVID positive and we don't want her to go through a prolonged induction process, putting many healthcare workers at risk, should we opt to do a cesarean section? I think this is a dilemma that many practitioners have, and I'd like your take on it, both of you.
So am I okay to go first?
Yes, sure.
So with regard, so you've actually compiled a lot of questions in that. With regards to, I'm going to take the one of delaying the possibility of induction if they are asymptomatic COVID positive patients.
Yes.
If the obstetric indication can allow them to wait for ideally 2 weeks, then the best thing would be to delay the induction till it's obstetrically possible. There are conditions in obstetrics where if the Doppler is very high, or especially the diabetic cohort, where you're very worried about losing the baby, then the practice would be to continue with the induction and keep them admitted. Sometimes we do give them professors, not mechanical induction in all of them. We would admit them, but follow, if they are called as the amber pathway, so they are kept together. All these women are cohorted together, and the same carer is providing care to all of them, so as to minimize transmission to the other women and to the staff as well. There is definitely no indication to deliver them by cesarean section currently.
Yeah. Can I say something on that?
Yes, Sangeeta.
What we do is now I work for a COVID only medical college. That is, we do only COVIDs and quarantinees and the travelers and what have you. But the induction is purely on obstetric indications. And if the cervix really will hold in Foley catheter and extra amniotic saline, that is our method of induction. Now, as you said, if she is at 38 weeks and she's positive, and let's say she has IUGR or she is on insulin because of gestational diabetes, and there is an obstetric indication to induce her, we will go ahead with induction. Our finding has been that waiting really doesn't pay, because none of us are really getting negative. I have no guarantee that they will be negative in 2 weeks. We have one policy though, that if she's totally normal, we don't allow her to go post-dated. Earlier we used to take her date +5. Now we don't. We induce her if she's really unfavorable the day before, so that by date +2 or 3 she's delivered. And regarding our antenatal policy, all women at 38 weeks will have an RT-PCR done. And here our women kind of listen to us, so they will be at home. And they come back when they're in labor. So in that 2 weeks, I know that basically they're okay, and I don't use a full PPE for them once their swab is negative. But suppose she's come in labor and she hasn't come into the surveillance of our schemes and she doesn't have an RT-PCR, then I do a TrueNat on her and I have the results in 3 hours. In that 3 hours, she's housed in the high-risk area. And then once she's away, her TrueNat is negative, I bring her back to the low-risk area and deliver her. Does that answer?
Yeah, very good. I think there are a couple of questions about allowing people to go post dates on COVID. And you answered that question, that if they're COVID positive, you don't allow them.
No, we don't.
But are you allowing, since you're swabbing them at 38 weeks,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about only the positive women.
Yeah.
You're swabbing women at 38 weeks.
Yes.
Then do you allow them at all to go post dates, or even if they're swab negative, are we inducing at 40?
Even if they're swab negative, I'll tell you what we are doing now. It's really, we say we are COVID only, but there are some hangers on who will come saying, no, I want to be delivered here. I will not get COVID. Then what do we do? So we rather have a planned delivery, but the planning starts only at 40 weeks, not even at 39.
Okay,
Do
fair
you
enough.
actually repeat the COVID? You've done at 38. Suppose she comes in at...
No,
You don't
provided
repeat
she
it.
doesn't have any symptoms and she has not had any contact, we don't repeat. We have a repeat policy for our quarantinees. We have the Gulf with us on a one-to-one basis. Every day we have about 7-8 who are coming from the Gulf who are pregnant positives. So for them, we tell them that the minute you land in whichever airport, if it's 2 in the morning, don't call us. But at 10 in the morning, please call us and speak to us. And we have a set of numbers given to them. And we tell them, come on day, they don't need to come to us. They go to the nearest center on day 5 for a test. And then we repeat that test on day 14. If nothing is urgent in this day 1 to day 14, they are at home. And we are on the phone with them. I think the phone works very well. And day 14, we do a proper antenatal care for them. The glucose monitoring, the screening, which, see, they've had no care wherever they're all worried. But we tell them to buy a gluconometer and they look at it, they call us, tell us their reports. Some of them even send us pictures of their abdomens and I can really figure out the thin ones at their 36 weeks. It all goes well. Lakshmi, I can't hear you.
We've lost Uma also.
Okay, I've unmuted my mic. Dr. Radhika, given that the post-dates policy in UK was 2 weeks or a week after due date, what is the post-dates policy you all are following? Because there seems to be a good clarity in the Kerala pathway of the term. Is there a change in how you all are looking at post-dates in the COVID times?
No, it just stayed as before.
Term plus 40.
Yeah.
And Dr. Sangeeta, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
This is about the attenders. You know, it's amazing to hear how you can keep the women disciplined and follow that 14-day rule and bring them in after the test. What do you do for the attenders? And are you allowing them to the hospital or are you not?
It's really surprising. You won't believe how times have changed. Once there is a positive, no, it's very, very surprising that, we're willing to look after her when she's delivering. But after that, what do we do with the baby? And there are no takers for that. Nobody wants to come from home. And, it's also nuclear that there is nobody from home to come. The father is 80, the mother is 79, the husband is in the US. My sisters are not there, my brothers are not there, no maid is available. So very many of the time we tell her that, we'll all help, but you need to be up and about and manage. She's in a room on her own. They have an isolated room if they're positive. So if it's a normal delivery, yes, if it's a cesarean, I make sure I get somebody, but there is no testing policy for the patient provided they don't have symptoms, they are young and they don't have comorbidities. And when they go back home, the same person isolates with her for 14 days. And if she has no symptoms, it's a tata bye-bye. If she has symptoms, she comes back. But we don't test the bystander.
And you don't keep her in for 2 weeks either.
No. We send her back home as fast as possible. But 2 weeks, she isolates at home.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Yeah. Yes, Radhika.
Dr. Radhika?
I just wanted to add, if we do that in India as well, one of the key things, and it's a personal I experienced as well, when you're so unwell with symptoms, you just don't want to move at all. And microthrombi is one of the pathology associated with COVID. So would you recommend for these pregnant women stockings, or are you giving them low molecular weight heparin? In UK, we are doing a lot of that.
Radhika, can I be very honest? We haven't had a SARI, a severe acute respiratory syndrome with pregnancy as yet. We haven't had one, but we have an SOP drawn up that we will give them Clexane when their SpO2 starts falling. And, at 36 weeks, I can't put them prone. And if she's asymptomatic, she doesn't get anything. She doesn't get oseltamivir. She doesn't get hydroxychloroquine. She just gets her iron, calcium, folic acid, lot of water, and a good diet. I haven't had the misfortune to handle an ARDS in such situations. But I guess, yes, Clexane is there, definitely. And then I think I'll call my medical friends.
Shall we just get Dr. Radhika to take the same question on how you all are handling attenders, and then we can have Dr. Sivasundari to give her views and ask a question?
This is the one thing which I would add, ma'am. Generally, we screen for the risk of thromboembolism, even if we are non-COVID patients, if they fit into the criteria. In our institution, we do provide them with TED stockings and Clexane as per protocols.
Yeah, that we do. That is, but the pregnancy-specific COVID thrombosis, we haven't seen it so far.
So an asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic COVID patient is not getting a routine thromboprophylaxis, whether they are antenatal or postpartum. And we are only going by their other thromboprophylactic risk assessment that we are doing.
Risk scores are put up, and that they get, but as a routine they don't get. Like the RCOG would say, admission in a hospital is a reason to have thromboprophylaxis. But very many of our women, even before, were admitted for 3 and 4 and 5 days before their deliveries. They don't get it. We give them only postnatal if required. But the cutoff is still the same for COVID as well. We don't give them. Radhika, is it different there? Do you give Clexane routinely?
Again, it is mainly to do with your VT risk assessment.
Yeah.
If they are asymptomatic COVID and they have come into the hospital and delivered, it adds their VT assessment a little bit more. So they will get it. The duration will vary between 10 days to 6 weeks based on the other results.
Yeah. And even before, we never gave it for 10 days. We gave it only for 5. Like, let's say she had an emergency cesarean section. The Clexane would be given only for 5 days, not 10. There's again where we differ. And if she had an antenatal heparin for some other reason, let's say she was SLE or she had an unprovoked thrombosis and she needed antenatal heparin, then she would get it for 6 weeks postnatally.
I'll start with Dr. Sangeeta again.
Yeah.
Rooming in of the baby is done with the mother for the asymptomatic and mildly symptomatic.
Yeah. Yes, Lakshmi, we've had a patient who was unfortunately discovered to be, she didn't fall into any category, and then later on discovered that disclosed that she was coming from a containment area, and she was found to be COVID positive on day 3 after her cesarean section, which was done for failed induction. Then she came to us, and the baby was just 3 days old. The baby was also positive. That's our youngest baby we've had. But she roomed in with the mother, and then the baby went home first, followed by the mother. The mothers are taking a long time to get negative. So they're just there and there and there for a long time.
So the mother's discharge policy is when they are negative?
Yeah. Baby also when they're negative.
So how often are you testing the mother?
It depends. Once she's positive and she has no symptoms, then after about 7 days. But if she's got symptoms, after the symptoms subside, and then once every 3-4 days, because we need beds.
Yeah, but then it's funded by the government, right?
Yeah, Kerala has no private COVID. Everything is in the government.
So for us, that is a big thing here. In private, how often can you test?
But the same thing holds. I have a feeling we will head there soon. We're just a little behind you guys. We probably will head there soon.
Are there
No,
any
no.
numbers?
Don't. Don't.
Pardon?
Are there lots of COVID positive pregnant patients?
No. We've been at it since March middle, and in our hospital we've had about 18. There are others who have had about 25. We're now sitting together and looking at the data. We have about 60 altogether, all over the state.
Radhika, in India, most even normal pregnancies, non-COVID, they don't walk around or go around much. They all like to stay at home and stay on the bed. And
I feel the public advice to remain at home and the home quarantine is working for the pregnancies.
Yeah, blessing and
so it is working for us indirectly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in our institution too, we hardly had 7 cases out of 300 COVID positive. But 2 were symptomatic, but twice we repeated the test, it came as negative. We gave them only symptomatic management.
They were symptomatic and we treated them as
Yeah.
COVID suspects.
One
but the
thing,
precaution
yeah, she was a PH GDM patient, and she had 1 episode of temperature at 100. Post-operatively, her saturation went down to 82 with 5 liters of oxygen. She came back to 96, but being COVID negative, we had to treat her in a separate way with all symptomatic management. We didn't want her to shift her to any other place. Luckily, with God's grace, she improved and went back home.
Radhika, there's been one question, with your experience with the treating COVID patients, indication of CT chest in an asymptomatic COVID positive prior to anesthesia. I think they probably mean is, will you be doing it at all?
Radhika, you need to turn on your audio.
Yeah, it's on.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
So basically, if they are asymptomatic COVID positive and they need a cesarean section for obstetric reasons, the anesthetist and the obstetricians all would wear a full PPE. We wouldn't request a CT scan particularly. We would encourage them to have a regional anesthesia to minimize the risk to the anesthetist.
That's, I think, exactly what we are following here as well.
Because CT scan itself increases especially in a breast that is very highly vascular. You don't want to increase their risk unnecessarily as well. I think that's why they're rationalizing the use of CT scan.
Can I ask a question?
Please, Dr. Sangeeta, yes?
You can ask Sangeeta, but we may not be able to answer.
No. It's a worry. I have these across 2 states just to see, and 2 countries as well.
Yeah.
Let's see how different we are and whether we're doing the right thing. It's, we have formulated a system right in February as to how we would change our antenatal care and our intrapartum guidelines, if at all ever, so that we bring the patient in less for antenatal care, the normals as well. But otherwise, we haven't changed anything. But there's one thing that's worrying me a bit is that we have asked for a fairly liberal policy on decisions for cesarean section to be made for these patients, because the fact of putting on the PPE, it can't be as an emergency, so we need to be prepared.
Exactly.
My only worry is that, I don't know if any of you have noticed it, has Radhika or Shivasundari noticed it, that is there we're not washing before our PP, we're just dousing ourselves with alcohol and then putting on a sterile drape. Are you worried about your post-cesarean infection rates? We've had 2-3 bowel distensions and abdominal distensions, and it has worried us, but they've gone home okay. But I just worry that we're not adhering to our aseptic protocol as what we would usually. I'm very happy scrubbing first, but here you're not scrubbing, and our PP is not sterile.
So in UK, can I answer that?
Yeah.
So in UK, what's happening is we are scrubbing as we would normally scrub for a cesarean section.
Okay.
And the gown that we wear is fluid repellent. It's got some tag called as RF. So we wear a fluid repellent gown.
Yeah.
And then you wear your visor, the FFP3. We wear all of that. So it is proper scrubbing as you would do. We cannot compromise on that for the sake of saving.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what do you do for your feet? You wear overshoes.
Yes, overshoes. You wear the theatre shoes and overshoes on the top.
And you wear a shield and you wear a goggle.
We wear a visor for those in whom the FFP3 mask technically should not leak and your visor should not get fogged up.
Yeah.
But there are a few occasions where people have had that because of the ill-fitting FFP3. In those cases, they have used an entire hood.
And you have a hood also?
Yes. No, only if you're wearing only a visor, you don't need a hood. You wear a normal theatre hat.
See, that's where we are different. I don't know if anyone is doing it. We wear the PPE, then we sterilize our hands with alcohol, then we wear the sterile drape, then we put on these 3 gloves one after the other. So the washing is not happening. That's my big worry.
Can I add, ma'am?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. For elective procedures, whatever ma'am has told, we are following.
Yeah.
But when it comes as fetal distress or emergency situation, the problem happens.
Yes.
And we had 2 patients, even though they were COVID negative, they had surgical site infection.
Yes.
So probably because of that. Because both of them, they had emergency section.
I
At
think
that
we
time,
need to collaborate between states and look at the sepsis rates after all this.
Dr. Radhika, when you're saying that you're scrubbing and wearing your sterile gown, then between each stage of adding the additional part of the PPE, you are using only alcohol hand rub. Is that correct?
No. So we are talking about a cesarean section.
Correct.
The first step we would do is we go into this donning room that's created. We would all wear like the blue, like a plasticky thing.
A plastic apron.
A plastic apron.
Correct.
You wear your FFP3 mask. Prior to wearing all of that, you have used alcohol gel in your hands and you wear your FFP3 mask and your visor. Then you go into the theatre scrub room and you properly scrub as you would do for any operative procedure. Then you wear the fluid repellent gown on the top of your blue pinny, and then you wear sterile double gloves. So you're already completely dressed. You are sweating under it. That's a different issue completely. And one of the challenges we have had in placenta, like sections for placenta previa or placenta accreta and stuff like that, because you're in so much of attire, it's very difficult to communicate across to the team members because nobody can hear. The hearing is impaired. So what we have to scream far more. And if not, we have created laminated like grip sheets. So somebody points it for us to say what instrument we need. That is something we just created because the people are not able to hear what they want through this devices that we have.
Ma'am, one more question. Do you use negative pressure theatres because you deal a lot with the COVID positive patients, or else do you switch off the AC, which is very difficult for us? It's really suffocating after 30 to 45 minutes. So what do you use now?
We don't have a negative pressure system. We turn off our ACs and we bake inside our PPs.
Yeah. Correct. The same thing here.
We created 2 theatres, one for the COVID and the suspected COVID and the clean theatre.
Yeah.
So the clean
We
theatre
have them too. So the duty MO kind of takes we have a person on call, we have 2 people doing only COVID work. So they take the call as to whether they need to wear full PPE or which theatre they need to do. Some of them, they are negative. Because they have had a swab, let's say at 36 plus 7 days or 37 weeks. It's not 38 weeks, but they haven't moved out of their house. We do it with the routine, this thing. We don't wear PPE because I feel doing a cesarean with PPE is a Herculean task. I keep asking everyone, is there bleeding? Is there bleeding? Because I can't see anything.
Because the shield with the mask,
it's very
the field is very difficult. Yeah.
Very difficult.
Have you all started gynae operating?
No.
So in UK, gynae cancer operating is happening. And when you're doing TLHs and stuff like that, oh my God, it is so difficult, especially you don't want the gas to be let
coming out.
To ensure you literally you have to go to the toilet before drink,
Yes.
and you're in theater for a good 2.5 hours. You come out really exhausted. You are able to do only one major, if at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will be heading there soon because we are also thinking of starting our electives, but I worry how we do it.
Can I just take some questions from the audience that is on the chat box so that we can answer them? We have gone through the induction, we have gone through postings. We have got to this to Dr. Susan, and it's about, are you having any difference in how there's an interpretation of the markers? Any difference in the interpretation of the markers because of pregnancy?
So far, the same thing holds good, but we need more studies for analyzing the interpretation of results, because we have only one article which is analyzed for 9 patients, and they said C-reactive protein, NL ratio are specific markers, but they concluded by saying but neutrophils obviously increase in pregnancy. So we need more studies. Particularly, we have to take Indian population, UK population. We cannot interpret the same thing for everyone throughout the world. So we need more data and more studies.
I'm not
So I was going to add to that and say that the ones with severe COVID, we have observed white cell count and lymphocytes being affected predominantly. D-dimer has not been that effective, whereas ferritin has been still helpful in the management of these cases.
There is a question about guidelines of breastfeeding and bedside care. Would Dr. Radhika like to take that, please?
Yeah. So if the key thing is the mother COVID, if it's COVID negative, we are not bothered. We are not worried of that cohort at all. They can carry on as long as they ensure that they wash their hands before they feed the baby and stuff like that. Then the next group is the COVID positive but asymptomatic group of women. In those cases, current recommendation is they just wear a normal mask and feed the baby as they would normally do. And obviously the baby gets tested with the PCR. If they are COVID positive and symptomatic, then obviously the mother's care becomes primary importance in that case. And in that case, the babies are being taken care of. If it depends upon how well the mother is when she's symptomatic. If she's been really unwell, the babies have sadly been separated from the mother, and they've been taken care of in the red area in the neonatal unit.
Dr. Radhika, I'd like to verify when you mentioned they will wear the normal mask, you mean the 3-ply surgical mask. Is that what you mean? Or you're meaning a 3-ply surgical? There is a question following on with that, mentioning about the donning policy, because you mentioned you wear the repellent gown, visor and N95. I think the question is to just clarify, because we have got a full PPE, that is the type of, the jumpsuit type of PPE. The question is to ask, are you using that type of a PPE or you're using a theatre gown type of a PPE?
Theatre, not the jumpsuit.
Like what we use for HPSAG and HIV. That's what they probably are using.
Correct.
And
we have a PPE kit which is done in our institution. They themselves they stitch and they provide to other areas. So, and above that, we use a sterile gown and apron, like a disposable thing we use, along with an N95. But if she becomes positive or symptomatic, and we use P100 also rather than N95.
So you wear the jumpsuit and on top of it the sterile gown. Is that correct?
Yeah.
There's a question from Dr. Manu. The kit you are talking about, would it be a sterile kit? That is the repellent gown, the visor and the N95. The visor
they are not. They are not sterile. They are newly packed stuff. You take it out per case, but I don't think they are sterile. This is primarily for protecting ourselves, isn't it? All this is protecting ourselves. From the patient's perspective, it is the cleaning, draping, and what you do to prevent them from cross-passing.
What about your patients who have been on epidural, Radhika?
They continue to have the epidural. We actually encourage them to have early epidural so as to avoid rushing in for a GA section.
Okay, and what would your elective section rate be? Is there anything like that at all?
There is an
COVID positive.
elective section rate. It has not gone higher in the COVID patient. I mean, it's only gone higher if they were COVID symptomatic and not well, and if you had to conduct a delivery to make them feel better. If that makes sense.
I've got a question about pushing. I would like all three of you to give me your views, and it can be brief because we are running out of time. To prevent aerosol generation, that is one of the key when they are positive. And to get a lady to push with a mask on is extremely difficult. Even to get them to push sometimes is hard. We have been thinking we'll push in the left lateral and try and see whether that at least prevents direct exposure. Can I have views from everybody how you all are managing the second stage of labor? Are you allowing head to descend to the perineum and then do the pushing so that duration is less? Are you using different postures? Are you using masks?
Can I take the question now?
Yes,
Yeah. So what we do is we give N95 mask for the patient, and we have device so that we put a screen actually in between the patient's face and delivering, so that the aerosol generation becomes less. Ordinary screen, okay, so that it can be disposed of after the delivery, so that it prevents, because what we have is we have almost all patients who don't come with COVID test. Many of them, they don't do the test, they walk in as an emergency, so we don't have the results. So that's what we do to prevent the aerosol generation. We allow her in left lateral position, and then we monitor the second stage as usual. Only the instruments are applied if obstetrically or when it is clinically indicated. Otherwise, we don't routinely apply any instruments for delivery of the baby unless it is warranted.
Dr. Radhika?
Plexiglass which is available, which can be used. I've not used it personally. We have not. We also are using a cloth screen only. But this plexiglass is worth looking at because they do not want to wear the mask when they're pushing.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Dr. Radhika?
I think India is ahead of the game with this. The women are just wearing a normal surgical mask and they're pushing. And the person who's delivering, the midwife, pretty much the midwives who are there, and they just wear PPE and they're delivering. So I think India is ahead of the game.
You have the luxury of midwife delivery. We don't.
We don't have.
One question.
We don't have a plexiglass, and we don't keep a screen also because we're worried about what's happening to her. She wears a mask, and we conduct the second stage so far. Only our cesarean section rates have gone up. So our cesarean section rate for after we started off in March stands at 53%, which is high.
I think certainly there is a low threshold for a section. I think we need to be honest about that.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Radhika, just one question. Routine antenatal testing, meaning your mums who are pregnant, say the EDD is 20th of July. When would you bring her in for a test? You said 72 hours, within 72 hours.
Ours is 38 weeks.
Yeah, you said 38. No, that's why I want to know what.
Okay.
What are you
So
doing?
at the minute, that's not even being done. Only if they're getting elective section and induction, they're being tested.
Okay.
The others, we are just not testing them. They're only getting tested if they have got symptoms.
Otherwise, treating them as suspect.
No, so when they come in labor, they will all get a swab, and you will wear everything and deal with them, and you get the result only after they have delivered.
So there is no antenatal testing.
Just another clarification, our 38 weekers, we started on 38 weekers for all patients, but that wasn't really working. So we started on 38 weekers for the quarantinees, for the suspects, for the containment zones and the hotspots.
Routine.
But the normals, we don't test.
So you would, Dr. Sangeeta, you will still have walk-ins who will come, who will not have a test?
We don't have walk-ins because it's there in the press that we deal only with COVID. But yes, in Trivandrum, in Medical College and SAT, where I'm going to be there in the next 1 month, hopefully, they will walk in, but they go to the non-COVID side. But there is a seal even on the OP ticket. Have you traveled? Is your husband abroad? Do you have any symptoms? Do you come from a hotspot? Only if all these are no, the person who deals with is the person who writes the OP ticket or generates the OP ticket or casualty ticket. Only if these are no will she come to the normal area, otherwise she goes. But there will be a mix. There will be. Suddenly you will find a patient in the normal area who's got a respiratory rate of, let's say, 26. And then the whole system worries. But we've not had big problems so far.
But unfortunately, people they don't really tell you the truth sometimes.
Yeah, they don't.
We had one patient recently. I should not tell the profession. She came from GH and she told she has done her COVID test negative, but we didn't see her report. Actually, she's a healthcare professional, but we took all precautions and we took the test again. It turned out to be positive.
It will happen.
Yeah.
And I think there is a big taboo about being COVID positive.
Yes.
I think that should be broken. That's the reason I had to share with the presentation, I'm sure, which people did not hear in the participation, that being COVID positive, and I was pretty unwell. I was relatively unwell. My husband was even more unwell. And literally as a family, we all got it. But you can still be alive to talk to the...
Absolutely.
That's what they need to understand.
And the person who makes the COVID rounds every day is surprisingly the psychiatrist. He's there every day because everyone's having anxiety attacks. All the patients' pulse rates are everything is in the red zone, 120. So the sister keeps calling, and then we find that they're really very anxious, nothing else.
I think we also need it, Sangeeta.
Absolutely.
How are we doing for time?
I think we have run out of time, Dr. Jayashree. We are now 6 o'clock.
Extremely lovely discussion. I'm so happy with the way it's gone. Thank you very much, Radhika, Sangeeta, and Siva, and Uma. Uma has unfortunately had to go. I think she lost her Wi-Fi. She's messaged. So Lakshmi also thank you so much for helping me to organize the whole thing. And Khushbu, is there anything you want to add? Khushbu?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes,
It was a wonderful discussion.
Yes, Siva.
Thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity, and it was a great time, ma'am, and wonderful discussion and so many inputs from different parts of the world.
Exactly. I think
really awesome.
Really learning experience for us.
Ma'am, sorry for the initial internet disruption, but overall it was very good. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for the participation. Thank you, Radhika ma'am, Dr. Shiva Sundari, Dr. Sangeeta, everyone. Dr. Jayashree, Dr. Lakshmi, and even Dr. Uma is now. Thanks a lot, ma'am. Thank you so much. We will share with you the recorded video and the downloadable video as well of the presentation.
Well, mine would have been a washout anyway, so it's all right.
But the slides
No,
were
No, it wasn't a complete washout, Radhika. I mean, that is the truth. We were able to pick up, I would say more than 50% of the job.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Sorry about
Thank
the
you so
audio,
much, ma'am.
Radhika.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you to
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Stay safe. Be careful.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye. Thank you.